at the end of the Civil War, or emerging from the Russian Civil War, Russia was like a man beaten within an inch of his life. That's the way Lenin described it. A little bit like old mate here. But nowhere near as happy. The economy was ruined. Russia was experiencing incredible social dislocation. I mean, we talked about the instances of cannibalism, societal breakdown. It was a very unhappy place. Workers were hungry, cold. The countryside was rife, okay, with revolts. Particularly, there was incredibly dangerous peasant uprisings in the Tambov region and in the Ukraine. So things weren't good. Soviet Russia was in terrible trouble by the end of 1920. It's the Kronstadt Uprising, though, that provides Lenin with the impetus, the moment of clarity to change. As Lenin said, this is the flash which lit up reality better than anything else. So giddy up, yeehaw!
Good to know you got my back, partner. Hey, howdy, hey! Yeah!
That's what I wanted. That's a giddy on that Lenin horse. Yeah, and ahoy! Let's start talking about the Kronstadt Uprising. It's been a long day. Let's go. Alrighty, so alright. The communists attempted to resolve the profound economic and social crises at the end of the Civil War by continuing with war communism. And the logic behind that was they'd won the Civil War, and war communism, that, as Trotsky said, everything for the front, had rallied the economy to support that end. Could the policies of war achieve victory in peacetime? Ultimately, the answer was no. That this was an ill-conceived strategy. Some of the things that then continued was Prodrovetska, grain requisitioning. And this, of course, then inflamed peasant anger towards the government. Militarization of the workplace was extended with the proposal of labor army, so using Red Army soldiers in the workplace, but under military discipline. And Red Army soldiers wanted to go home; they didn't want to be in the factories. So, a great deal of anger and disillusionment festered throughout Soviet Russia as the Civil War came to an end, despite the Red victory. The immediate trigger, though, that will set off the Kronstadt Rising will be a strike by workers. So in February 1921, Petrograd's workers went on strike over a cutback in their rations. Now, in response to that, the government deployed trainee Red Officer armies to lock the workers out of their workplaces. And so you've got thousands of, a real sense of militant confrontation perhaps emerging, and the workers themselves are clearly very unhappy with the situation. Martial law is declared. Now, where this all becomes, emerges more than just an industrial dispute between the workers of Petrograd and the Soviet government is when, the Kronstadt sailors become involved. Some background to them. They had impeccable revolutionary credentials. Trotsky described them as the pride and glory of the Russian Revolution, the reddest of the red. They were the first. Kronstadt was the first place to go Soviet in 1917. It declared its independence and declared Soviet power in July 1917. The Kronstadt sailors, they were an elite military unit. They served in the Civil War, providing a really important force for the Reds during that conflict. They'd helped storm the Winter Palace. They'd turned up in the midst of the July Day. So there was a whole range of times when they'd actively proven their commitment to the revolution. Okay, so Kronstadt sailors in March or late February get word of what's going on in Petrograd, and they'd also been disturbed too by letters they'd received from their relatives in the countryside telling them of the continued grain requisitioning. So the Kronstadt sailors sent a delegate of their comrades to Petrograd to investigate what's going on. They're alarmed by what they find. The soldiers, out the fronts of workplaces. They speak to workers who tell them, they're cold and they're hungry and that their food has been cut back further and they're pretty angry as well. They also pick up rumors that the Cheka had been executing workers, which was not true, but rumors can still nevertheless be damaging. All right, 1st of March 1921, critical turning point. There was a mass rally held in Kronstadt's Anchor Square. And the sailors, this rally, the sailors at this rally produce a number of statements that are really critical, that say some things that are alarming about the Soviet government. They used language that compares the Soviet regime to the Tsarist autocracy, that Soviet Russia was like a prison, an all-Russian penal colony is one of the words that they use. They describe the new regime as a commissarocracy. And they present some pretty pressing demands, such as that they want Soviets without Bolsheviks. The rally is attended by Soviet officials, by government officials, but they're not able to dampen the mood. And the other element that's really important too is that Kronstadt sailors call for a third revolution. Now, if you, what's the first couple? You've got February, then you've got October. And what they're doing is in March 1921, calling for a third revolution is implying that the ideals of October haven't been fulfilled. Alrighty, you got a bit of an issue now, don't you? Soft narcomias. Okay, so it's a moral and a military crisis. The moral one's the easy one to get your head around. The reddest of the red have come out against the red government. And so this doesn't look in any way, shape, or form very good. It looks, it's a critique of a so-called revolutionary government that's challenging them on their revolutionary ideals. It's calling for a return to October, the October revolutionary ideals, implying that they haven't been fulfilled. The other element too is that it's a direct military challenge. Worth getting out a map, so having a bit of a looky at that, and seeing that Kronstadt was an island naval base, and it was designed to defend Petrograd, but of course it could equally threaten Petrograd. The ice of the Gulf of Finland freezes over in winter, and in March 1921 it's yet to thaw. It would take a couple of weeks for that to happen. Thaw means for it to melt, to break up. Now, if the ice had thawed, so if the government doesn't respond to this immediately, that means Kronstadt's going to be virtually untakeable, and it would be impossible to recapture it. But while there is ice there, they can still launch the Red Army in an assault against Kronstadt. So there's a time factor that's leading to this crisis, and the Petrograd, the second most important city in Soviet Russia, could well be threatened. Lenin and Trotsky and others in the government take a hardline approach to this. They explain what's happening in Kronstadt as an act of counter-revolution. Whether they believe that the Kronstadt sailors are different, that they've evolved into a group who aren't the same group as those who served in the Civil War, is up for debate, or whether they just are telling a story themselves to make them believe that what they're going to be doing is okay. They ultimately judge Kronstadt as an act of counter-revolution. They argue that the Kronstadt sailors are not the same. However, in reality they actually are. They had always been fluid in many ways in their political allegiance. They had been utterly committed to the revolution, but amongst the Kronstadt sailors there are anarchists, left SRs, as well as Bolsheviks. With this group that are coming out against the revolution, the government responds because of the broader context of what's happening. The Greens in particular, they want to project and need to project an image of unshakable strength, because if they give in on Kronstadt, perhaps Kronstadt could be the spark that further inflames the Green Revolution. On the 7th of March, therefore, 1921, a massive military assault is launched by the Red Army under General Tukhachevsky against Kronstadt. 50,000 Red Army soldiers attack Kronstadt that's been held by 16,000 Kronstadt sailors. And these scenes would have been incredible as well. You can imagine the soldiers going across the ice under no cover, and so were able to be shot down by the Kronstadt defenders. But the Red Army brings in the big guns, literally heavy artillery, air support, Chekists, even delegates. Okay, to um, even delegates from a communist congress that's happening at the time that we'll look at in another chat. Join in the assault. It's bitter and bloody fighting. So the ice does break in sections, and soldiers are sucked down into the freezing water. But waves and waves of assaults by the Red Army soldiers are ultimately successful. They breach the walls of Kronstadt. But even still, when they've done that, it's street by street, house by house. It's a bitter and bloody battle for Kronstadt. In the battle that follows, 10,000, or in the battle, I should say, 10,000 Red Army soldiers lose their life. Kronstadt sailors lose 5,000. And after, too, so the naval base is captured by the 17th of March, but after its capture, the Cheka is sent in, and thousands more sailors are executed and imprisoned. And quite a number of them, thousands in fact, flee Kronstadt, fleeing back over the ice towards Finland. Kronstadt is a critical turning point in the revolution. Historians recognise that. So Sheila Fitzpatrick says it's like a parting of the ways, if you'd like, a break that the communists make to the revolutionary tradition of October. Emma Goldman, an anarchist, who was a witness to these events, sort of talked about hearing a revolutionary anthem, okay, while the assault was going on, and said it sounded to her like the funeral music. Ultimately, though, the Kronstadt Uprising was a lesson learnt and a lesson taught by the Bolsheviks. The lesson learnt was that things needed to change, and ultimately that will be that when the NEP, the new economic policy, will come in. But the lesson taught was that any opposition, even if it's the reddest of the red, would not be tolerated and would be brutally suppressed. As Trotsky warned the Kronstadt sailors, we're not negotiating with you, surrender or you'll be shot like partridges. And ultimately they came to a very tragic end. Well, that was a bit sad, wasn't it?
Let the cool times roll.
Till next time, thus we done. Ja, stay political.